Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Shantawene Wash Processed Ethiopia from Pop Coffee Works. And there's the bag right there. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the back, as well as there is an astronaut being carried off by a coffee grinder, and I really like that. We have the UFO up front. They have some pretty neat artwork on these bags. The Pop, based out of Toronto, Ontario, and this is their first time ever appearing on this channel. And they were somewhat of a suggestion to us by Chris, as he was sending us some information about some coffees from this coffee roaster, and it caught my interest. And if you go to their website, you can probably figure out why it caught our interest so much, as there's a certain coffee that definitely caught my attention. But the Shantawene was one that I was kind of curious about, given that I might not enjoy reviewing wash-processed Ethiopians, but the Shantawene is a slight bit of an exception, given that it typically comes out as a really good coffee. I took home first place in our first ever top 10 coffees of the year list, so I decided to tack it on with an order. So we do have another review from Pop coming up, but this one right here I feel like is also a pretty interesting review, given I had no idea what to expect from this coffee roaster going into it. This right here is day 25 of this coffee. And we also do need to show the Canadians some more love, as we do not have enough Canadian coffee reviews on this channel. But recipe we settled on was a pretty concentrated one, a 15:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60. Now, Pop is one of the lightest roasting Canadian coffee roasters I've ever had, so I feel comfortable calling them a Canadian light for the roast profile. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 13, first impression, and there was big, vibrant stone fruit right from the start. So it's clean and floral to complement the very strong stone fruit sweetness that was coming from it. It was a little grassy, and it felt really light, so it was a positive first impression, and I think I was just really surprised with how light this coffee is, given my previous experiences with most Canadian coffee. Day 15, brewed it through the Chemex, and it was continuing to skew a little bit more towards the big stone fruit brightness, but also the Chemex did provide a bit more of this seemingly floral base, and I don't know what I was necessarily seeking more, because oftentimes when it comes to washed Ethiopians, I do tend to prefer the florals to what is a little bit more of a jammy sort of stone fruit taste, as this one right here, they have listed on here apricot, and oftentimes I describe it as apricot maybe being a little bit more jammy, and typically peach being a little bit more fresh fruit tasting. So there was the listed lavender making a lot of sense, as it did have a purple florality to this cup of coffee. Less grassy this way, so a slight improvement. Was an interesting start, so we continue. Day 17, back through the V60 at higher temperatures, and a lot of the lightness can be felt in the cup as it continued to radiate the vibrant floral aspects. So I think at this point I was maybe trying to drive a little bit more of the florality out of this cup of coffee, and it was working. Pretty clean and sweet while really emphasizing the heightened florality. I think that's why I settled on some higher temperatures, and in addition to that, the higher concentration, because I was really trying to get a lot of robustness out of the florality that was coming from this coffee. Day 19, another day through the Chemex at higher temperatures, and it's a slightly different cup, as the most dominant aspect actually feels like a brown candy sweetness. So none of these notes are the same, and that's kind of the thing about this coffee, is that I kept finding minor adjustments was really impacting the overall results of this coffee. Definitely a sensitive coffee to the brew. Slight florality and even a bit of herbality to the cup of coffee. I think they have a hibiscus note listed on here. Makes a lot of sense. There is that additional herbality characteristic to it. Much more of the stone fruit to this cup as it does cool, but surprisingly brown candy sweet, which was very interesting to me. Day 21. Coffee has slightly tapered off today, as it feels somewhat less vibrant than before, skewing a bit more on the citric side of things as opposed to the florality, which was by no means quite as distinct or prominent on this day. And I think maybe there was just some sort of brewing error, because as kind of alluded to, none of these notes are really the same. This cup of coffee is a little inconsistent. Granted, I kept making adjustment after adjustment to maybe find a good sweet spot in this coffee. I think this final cup I brewed might be that sweet spot, as it is very bright and vibrant and sweet, so I really like that higher concentration, higher temperatures for it. Day 23, ran through the V60 with those higher temperatures, and I still felt like I noticed somewhat of a decline in this coffee, as the listed hibiscus made much more of a presence at this time. It's entirely possible that we went more jammy to slightly different floral to maybe a little bit more herbal through this cup of coffee, like a little bit more of a rapid aging process than typically expected. Kind of interesting given how light it is, but Stone fruits, brown candy, not quite as pronounced on this day. And this is the day I made my tasting wheel, so it's going to be kind of interesting to see how things chart on the tasting wheel, which we will go ahead and put up right now. All right, let's run through this. Cleanliness, level 4. Yeah, it's still a washed Ethiopian. It's still a really clean cup of coffee. I think it's kind of perfect around that level 4 mark. Finish, level 4. Yeah, sweetness, level 4. Acidity, level 4. Florality, level 4. I feel like maybe this is kind of a safe-looking Ethiopian tasting wheel, because I can still agree with all of those traits on this day as well. Stone fruit, level 4, and citrus fruit, level 4. Citrus fruit, I'm going to tone down a little bit today to a level 3. Stone fruit, still there at a level 4. Savoriness, I'm going to tone down. It's not quite as herbal today. Again, this cup of coffee has been so inconsistent in the way it's turned out. And the caramel, I could bump all the way up to a level 4 because I'm experiencing the brown candy sweetness yet again in very strong prominence. What's the butterscotch is the term I'm looking for. Very butterscotch-like cup of coffee. Spice, salt, I might tone down. All right, I don't really agree with this tasting wheel, and I think that just kind of goes to demonstrate what I've been experiencing from this coffee is this tasting wheel, the top part of the tasting wheel has been pretty consistent, but it's kind of the rest of the coffee that has been a little bit more inconsistent because sometimes it's really, really good. Like today, when I think I finally found the perfect recipe for it, it's really, really good. But I feel like maybe if I would have brewed this 4 days ago, it wouldn't have been quite as good because it just seemed to keep going through these highs and lows that was kind of hard to predict and anticipate. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is a really interesting one, and I think it's actually a little bit more positive than I've been kind of pointing towards because once you get this coffee right, then it's really good, but it reminded me of 2 coffee roasters, both the positives and the negatives. It reminded me of Manhattan for the brown candy sweetness, which is a little bit more vintage, old school Manhattan, which is kind of funny to say at this point. Once upon a time, Manhattan had wonderful brown candy sweetness to almost all of their coffees, and they still do with a lot of them. Maybe not quite as notable now, but the other coffee roaster it reminded me of was Say, as it was super acidic, super light. There were times it was unpredictable and inconsistent. That's the word I'm looking for, which is a lot of what Say's coffees can be. So it's got really good traits to it, and it's got some little frustrating traits, but for the most part, I think this is on the better side, more vibrant and fun side of Ethiopian coffees in general, which is something I don't usually say a lot. So I think Pop did good on this coffee, and I kind of mentioned that we do have one more Pop review coming up, so I think that one will kind of round out our overall impressions of this coffee roaster. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to is if you really like your light coffees and you're maybe looking for something on the Canadian side of things, then this is one of the better Canadian coffees I've had too in quite a while. I found it to be quite flavorful, I found it to be quite vibrant, and I found a lot of depth to this cup of coffee. Given how many things on this tasting wheel chart high and how they chart high on different days, there's a lot to be figured out from this cup of coffee, as I kind of found out myself. So if you like a little bit more tricky, complex, somewhat inconsistent coffees, I think this one's a pretty good one. I thought it was pretty nice in general. It still had high cleanliness, it still had high florality, still had high sweetness, and plenty of fruits. So those are my traits, my characteristics. For the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything else from Pop, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Shantawene wash processed Ethiopia from Pop Coffee Works. Thank you for watching.